Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to our seventh in our Stream Compensatory Mitigation webinar series. We're really happy you could all join us today. Thanks for being here. My name is Rebecca Kisslinger. I'm a science and policy analyst at the Environmental Law Institute, and I direct our wetlands program. This webinar series is hosted by ELI and was developed in coordination with an advisory committee of stream mitigation experts. And it's funded by an EPA wetland program development grant, and we thank you all for your support. For those of you who are new to the series or who aren't familiar with ELI, the Environmental Law Institute is a nonprofit law and policy research organization. We're based in Washington, D.C. Our wetlands program provides timely, balanced information on wetlands, law, policy, science, and management through research, education, and convenings like this Stream Compensatory Mitigation webinar series. We have lots of information and a lot of resources and reports on our website. And you can also join our mailing list, Wetlands and Waters, from our wetland program page, and that's eli.org/wetlands-program, and I encourage you to go there and learn more about our program. So we've had a really great lineup of webinars for this webinar series. We started it back in July with a kickoff webinar. Then we've had webinars on assessing stream functions and conditions, on barrier removal, watershed approach, monitoring and performance standards. Last month we had a webinar on reference. Today we'll talk about credit and debit determination, and we have two webinars planned for May. One on stream restoration for multiple purposes, which is going to be really interesting. That's May 2nd. And another on long-term performance or evaluation of stream restoration projects on May 16th. You'll see invites for those in your inboxes within the next couple of weeks. And then we're planning a wrap-up webinar for June. So look for more information on those. And you can also find information on our previous webinars and upcoming webinars on our webpage. The URL is here on the page. We have all of the presentations from the past webinars, and the archived recordings of the webinars are there as well. So if you missed one or want to watch one again, you can do so from that page. And our webpage for this webinar is here as well. You can find the presentations for today are uploaded there, and you'll find the archived recording there in a week or so. If you have any questions or want more information about the series or our program, feel free to email me or give me a call at any time. My email address is on the screen here. So for today, I'm really excited about today's webinar on credit debit determination. We have an excellent panel lined up, and I'm really grateful to have them here today. As you all know, the 2008 compensatory mitigation rule allows for some variation and flexibility in determining credits and debits. So states and districts across the country are working on developing new credit and debit approaches and methodologies. And today our panelists are going to discuss three such approaches from across the country, from West Virginia, Wyoming, and Tennessee. And I'm going to introduce our panel now. I'm really excited to have them here today. First, we'll have Danny Bennett from the West Virginia Division of Natural Resources, where he's worked since 1998. He's currently a Natural Resource Program Manager there and serves as the supervisor of the coordination unit at the agency. His responsibilities include coordinating agency responses to 404, 401 permits, commenting on NEPA documentation for projects throughout the state, and representing the agency at a variety of meetings and workshops and webinars. While at the agencies, received training in wetland delineation and completed the Roskin Natural Stream Design courses. He earned a Master's of Science degree at the University of Tennessee, working with black bass on Norris Reservoir. And he's also served as a contractor for the Tennessee Valley Authority, conducting IBI surveys in the Clinch and Powell watersheds. We're happy to have him today. Then we're going to hear from Julia McCarthy. She's an environmental scientist with the US EPA's Region 8. She has worked in the Clean Water Act Section 404 regulatory program for over 10 years. Her work currently includes Waters of the US policy, 404 program implementation in Utah, and stream mitigation policy and tool development in Colorado and Wyoming. Julia has an MS in ecology from Colorado State University and a BS in biology and a certificate in environmental studies from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And before graduate school, she was a professional crayfish trapper in the North Woods of Wisconsin and can make a mean crawfish étouffée. We're happy to have Julia here. And then finally, we'll finish up our webinar today with Vina Jones. She's a professional geologist with the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation. Vina has a 2-decade-long career in water resources and managed the development of the stream mitigation guidelines and Tennessee stream quantification tool in the state. As you can see, we have a really great panel. I'm really excited to hear their presentations. But before we do that, just a few logistics. We have all the participants on mute now, but as I always say, we really encourage you to participate in today's webinar and send us your questions. At any time during the presentations, you can go ahead and type those into the question box on your GoToWebinar control panel. And as always, I'd like to ask you now if you could just type in where you are, how many people are in your office, and let us know that you're on, and get warmed up on that question box, because we'd like you to definitely ask our panelists a lot of questions. So seeing some answers come in now, which is always good, so I know you can hear me. Excellent. Oh, I see someone else in Oakland. All right. So we'll stop at the end of each presentation to allow for some questions, and then hopefully we'll have some time at the end. Again, if you have any technical questions, feel free to email me. I'll do my very best to help you out. That, again, is our URL for today. If you want to download presentations or find the archived recording there later. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Danny to get us started.
Good day, everyone. Guess I can hear a little bit of background, so I guess I'm up.
I can hear you. Yep.
I've been with the agency for right at 20 years. I started in the coordination unit, and now I'm the supervisor of the unit. So something I didn't envision myself doing while going to the University of Tennessee, but it's worked out well.
Excellent. Danny, we don't see your screen yet. Did you?
Got to hit that little button that says show your screen.
There we go. Now we got you. All right.
There we go. Like about everybody here, when the 2008 rule hit, that changed the game. Shortly thereafter, we did have our first mitigation bank start the process as the RRT started to get together. It took us about 1.5 years, almost 2 years, to get that bank permitted. So we're about 8-9 years into the game at this point. The first bank that came online was at our Meadow River wetland complex. Had some stream components, but also had a wetland component. So they had their own credit debit system. They came up with something on their own. Shortly after that bank got permitted, another banker came online who had his own credit debit system. Shortly thereafter, we had our third bank come online that had their own credit debit system. And those credits and debits ran the gamut from 10,000 credits to 1,000 credits, basically about the same size. So it was quickly determined that we needed to do something to unify or to standardize, or we'd be running all over the place trying to figure out what the credits and debits were for the bank. So we had three basic criteria for trying to decide what our credit debit system wanted to be. First, we wanted it functional based on the Clean Water Act as per the 2008 rules. So we wanted chemical, physical, and biological components. We wanted it relatively easy to apply, that a consultant could go out there in a fairly short order of time, gather the data to work the tool. And the third thing was we wanted it defensible. So we kind of looked for things that were already out there. I would say we stole from other people. We'll say permanently borrowed, but we used a variety of things. So we came up with what we call the SWIM, which stands for Stream and Wetland Valuation Metric. So It's based on, there's two main components. There's an HGM, the hydrogeographic model, and the SWIM. It's an integrated approach. Some of the things it can do, it looks at the impact and the mitigation assessments, looking at baseline and what the projected is, utilize and evaluate project alternatives, and it's transparent. Everybody can read the screen, so it does do a number of things, and its main purpose is to tabulate credits and debits. It takes into account numerous fields, including temporal loss, long-term protection, water chemistry, and some incentives in there that we'll talk about. I know the screen is hard to read, but the SWIM is available on the web, either through the Pittsburgh or Huntington websites. If you cannot access them, feel free to give send me an email, and I can send you the SWIM. But it's basically an Excel spreadsheet. The top half of the spreadsheet is basic information, lat long, where the project is, mitigation length. But we'll go over the columns. The first column is the impact. So that is the area that you're actually filling. In most cases, it's a fill. The second column, if you're doing permitted responsible mitigation, that would be the area that you're going to do your project in. It's baseline conditions. And the last column is what you project that project to be at maturity. The top half is the HGM, middle half is EPA's rapid bio assessment for habitat, both the high gradient and the low gradient. The next section deals with water chemistry, conductivity, pH, and dissolved oxygen. And then the final section that we evaluate uses the West Virginia Stream Condition Index, which is an aquatic benthos index. Just a little bit of a close-up, just like I was saying before. It's broken up into three sections. The top half is the HGM, which was developed by the Corps of Engineers at the ERDIC lab. EPA's rapid bioassessment protocols for wadable streams. West Virginia DEP's water quality indicators, and our West Virginia Stream Condition Index, which is basically an IBI for aquatic insects. If you go into the actual SWIM, there's the second page, which goes into some of the incentives or some of the other fields that go in there. Temporal loss to construction, which is basically if you have a project and it's going to be 2 years before you're able to start your mitigation, you would put 2. If you're going to do your mitigation congruently, it would be 0. If you're going to use a mitigation bank, we allow you to put 0 into that field. If you're going to use the in lieu fee program, you would put a 4 years into that space. Basically, because it generally takes our in lieu fee 2 years to get the ball rolling, another year or so to actually get the project on the ground once they receive the monies. So you're looking at about 4 years delay between the time that the impact happens and the time that mitigation actually gets put on the ground. We also have for temporal loss to construction. The temporal loss to construction is basically for permitted responsible mitigation projects. That is a 0 if you're using banks or in lieu fee. This is basically for the credit side of things. So when you're trying to calculate the credits or the debits, when you're trying to calculate the debits that you're responsible for. And there's a long-term protection. So basically we've determined that long-term is 100 years. So anything over 100 years we consider forever. But in West Virginia, given the amount of mining and stuff we have, we can't always have a 100 years of protection. So there is an avenue that if you only have 20 years of protection, but there is a penalty to pay. The next big component is the restoration levels. They're loosely based on Roskin's priority restoration. So a level 1 incentive, basically if you're doing level 1 restoration, you're looking at dimension, pattern, and profile. Level 2, you're probably only dealing with two of those two components. You may be doing a lot of stabilization, but you're not changing pattern. Level 3 is basically bank stabilization. And there's some incentives in there that we'll go over in a few slides. But that was basically put in there to incentivize our consultants to do higher level restoration. We also have on our buffers over here, we do allow credits to be generated for buffer protection. And that's split into the first 100 foot and the second up to 200. And we do have bankers that will protect up to about 400 foot of riparian habitat. The other part of this is the HGM, which was developed by ERDIC. It is a bit more data intensive, where you actually are collecting data and putting that data into a spreadsheet, opposed to EPA's rapid bioassessment, which is a visual assessment, which leads to a little bit of judgment. The HGM doesn't have quite that level of adjustment. What it also allows you to do is you can sort of double check. So if your HGM says you have a very high quality system, but your EPA rapid assessment says it's marginal, it gives you a good indication that you need to look at it a little bit closer. But it's split into hydrology, biology, and habitat. Now, as you can see on the HGM screen, it is data driven. So as you enter the data, the spreadsheet will actually calculate the values for you. It's pretty simple to fill out, and a relatively simple time frame of getting that information in there. Like I said before, it is broken down into physical, chemical, and biological, basically used in aquatic insects in the physical parameters. Scored on the basic 0 to 1, 0 being the LA ditch, and 1 being your standard reference streams. Once you put all the information into the spreadsheet will actually calculate your debits and credits, but it's based on a percentage on each of those components. If you use the HGM part, it's 50% HGM, then 50% the rest of the swim, and then within that swim, it's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Just giving you some breakups of how we calculated that. Don't need to go over that line by line, but probably the key to look at it is the restoration levels. So basically, once it grinds the numbers, it goes to the incentive levels. So if you're doing level 1 restoration, we basically give you a 100% jump. And that was to strongly encourage our consultants to do high-level restoration. So if they're doing changes in dimension, pattern, profile, they're going to get more credits for their work. And fully realizing that requires quite a bit of front-end work on the design. So try to incentivize them to actually do the design that they need to do. Again, we're not going to accept level 1 restoration on a ephemeral high gradient stream, and just giving you a little bit of idea of what those incentive levels are and what it takes to get those incentive levels. Most of our consultants on our mitigation banks are doing level 1 restoration. Probably 75% of the bank will be level 1 with about 25% on level 2. Our permanently responsible mitigation projects generally focus more on the level 2 and level 3 restoration. We do allow stream preservation to generate credits, and that's based on a ratio based on the value or the functional value of that stream. We only accept for preservation streams that score 0.80 or above. So these are very high quality systems. And with the higher quality, the greater credit that are generated. We generally try to stay, we don't want any of our banks to have more than 30%, give or take, of the total credits being generated by preservation. We can, on exceptional systems, go higher than that, but generally 30% sort of our rule of thumb on the amount that we want our banks to have preservation credits. And that about does it. So, the total goal is to try to get, cows out of the stream and restore our systems and adequately compensate the state and the citizens for impacts that occur to whether it's mining, pipelines, or Walmarts. So at this point, I'm done. And if anybody has any questions, I guess as soon as we finish up, I will be more than happy to answer them. And I did save a little bit of time. I was told that there are certain individuals who may use that time. So.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting. Thank you for going through that. We do have one question, and I have a question. The question is, how do you determine how much buffer to allow credit for?
Well, it's in the SWIM, so it will actually generate credits up to 400 foot. But once you pass the 200, the percentage of credits diminishes. So for the first 100, it's in one of the slides that tell you what that percentage is. So up to 400, but the first 100 has a higher ratio of credits generated.
Okay.
And then those buffers also have incentives if you're just protecting as is, or if you're doing supplemental plantings or doing revegetation. So we give extra credit for if you're doing supplemental plantings or revegetation, because that costs the consultant money, and we realize that, so we want to incentivize them to increase the value of that riparian buffer.
Okay, well, now we just got a lot more questions, so let me go through those before I ask mine. So about how long do you think a single assessment takes?
Depending on how complicated it is, but the EPA rabbit bioassessment part, that can be done probably within a half hour, because it's visual. And the more experience you have, the better you get at it. The HGM part is data intensive, so you have to actually measure trees in the riparian zone, get their DBHs, get stem counts, get species. So that's probably going to take 2 or 3 hours on a reach level.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have a set linear feet for a reach. Our rule of thumb is about 1,000 linear feet. We don't like our reaches to be a whole lot longer than that.
Sure. Okay. Great. Let me just ask a clarifying question. I think it was answered here, but what is the minimum buffer width that you require? And 25 feet, does that sound right? I think that's how I'm reading it.
Well, 25, 35, and that can change depending on, if we're in we've got a road that comes within, 15 foot. So we generally look at an average riparian buffer. We try to get as much as we can. There's nothing set in code or in the form itself that says you have to have at minimum 25. But as the RRT, we would not look favorably upon a bank that had a very small riparian buffer. We did have a bank that was where the stream actually ran down the middle of the road, and it had a very small riparian buffer, but that was the only available corridor. So we like it minimum 25. We prefer 50.
Mm-hmm. Okay. There was a question about what kind of protection instrument is used or required for streams given credit under preservation.
We've used a variety, everything from a deed restriction to a conservation easement, or we have had a couple of our banks actually donate the property once they were done with it to the Division of Natural Resources, or have sold the property to the division at a discounted rate, so it became state property at that point. Okay. And our management prescription for the area sort of served as the protection mechanism.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more, and then maybe
generally a conservation easement.
Okay, great. I'm going to ask one more, and maybe there was a few others. We can maybe come back to those later. How was the tool calibrated to ensure that the results adequately offset impacts? And as you're answering, I'm going to switch over to Julia.
We sort of, I mean, at the very beginning, we used to be on ratios, so 2 to 1, 3 to 1. So we looked at it at that ratio scale to try to match that up. So if a fairly typical impact occurred and they did full-blown restoration, they would probably be required, give or take, in about 2.5. They'd have to do about 2.5 linear feet of stream to compensate for that 1 foot of impact. Mm-hmm. The HCM was done a little bit different, but in general, we sort of tried to match it to what our regulated public was used to, or what they were used to. We've had very, very good response from our regulated public. They seem to appreciate the fact that if they're doing work on very low quality streams, that their mitigation is not as severe as if they were doing impacting a very high quality stream.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you so much for your presentations and for answering those questions. There's a few more we'll try to come back to at the end, but for now I'm going to switch over to Julia. Thanks again, Danny.
No problem. Thank you.
Hey,
Okay.
can you guys hear me?
We can, and we see your presentation.
Excellent. So thank you guys for having me today. Today, I really want to tell the story of Wyoming's evolution in credit and debit methods. So we've been spending quite a few years on figuring out kind of where we begin and where we want to go with this. And I think it's kind of an exciting story. And I'll just start. How come I can't? I'm seeming to have a problem moving slides. Uh-oh.
Sometimes it takes a minute. And it didn't shift yet.
Okay.
Did it shift? Try maybe using your arrows or it will go.
Uh-oh.
Is it not working still?
Yeah, it's okay. While we figure this out, you guys can all appreciate the photo I put up here of the Detroit riprap spotting in Wyoming.
Try using.
Oh, there it goes. Okay.
Good. Okay.
All right. So this story really cannot be told without acknowledging that it was a collaborative effort between a group of state and federal agencies that we, over the years, have referred to ourselves as the Wyoming Interagency Stream Technical Work Group. And this group is a subset of the Interagency Review Team in Wyoming. And this group worked together to develop the first stream mitigation procedures in 2013. And then we've continued to work together closely to improve the approach over the last few years. And so I think it's really important to acknowledge these folks before I start talking, because I really think that this effort would not have occurred without all of their tremendous knowledge and insights and commitment to the process. So, I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide. I think most of the folks here on this webinar probably know that we have a long history of mitigation in our program, and that has led to us learning many lessons. We've asked over the years a lot of good questions about whether mitigation is being successfully implemented in our program, and are we effectively offsetting impacts? And a lot of that research and those questions have led to the development of the 2008 mitigation rule, which really focused on the where and how of mitigation, and challenged us to work on improving our site planning, development, implementation, and then performance monitoring of mitigation projects. And so the mitigation rule, directly focuses the agencies to think about aquatic resource function and really start thinking about achieving ecological targets instead of just completing tasks. It defines performance standards in the context of being able to replace lost aquatic resource functions, and then it also defines debits and credits to represent the accrual or attainment of aquatic functions at a mitigation site or the loss of aquatic functions at an impact site. And so when we start to really think about aquatic resource function, we realize that we need better tools to tie data into our decision making. We want to be able to use the best available science to plan and implement mitigation projects. And so I think that the mitigation rule has set us on a good trajectory to think better about how to incorporate aquatic resource function and thinking about these ideas of aquatic resource functional lift at mitigation sites and loss at impact sites and integrating them better into our program. So there's been a range of approaches throughout the country for calculating debits and credits. Many of these are and continue to be activity-based or tied to certain restoration activities or types of activities. There are some methods out there that incorporate function or condition assessments into calculating debits or compensatory requirements, but then crediting might be based on a level of effort. Others that we've seen have moved entirely away from an effort or activity-based approach and apply an assessment approach at both impact and mitigation sites. So ELI has a lot of great resources. Rebecca touched on this at the beginning of the presentation, but one of the benefits highlighted in some of these documents on their website of function-based approaches in credit determination is that we can use functional methods to standardize across projects and consistently assess and credit lift across various approaches and techniques. So for example, when we move away from activity-based approaches and more towards these function-based approaches, whether a practitioner takes a process-based approach or a natural channel design-based approach to a restoration project, these function-based methods can consistently measure the endpoints or ecological responses of the system and assign credit based on the accrual or attainment of functions, regardless of the techniques employed, which is really, I think, what the mitigation rule asks us to do. So with that general background, I will now launch into my story about Wyoming. So how did we start this journey into developing function-based credit and debit methods? So we put together our first mitigation procedures back in 2013, and this was really driven by a couple mitigation banks that were proposed in 2011, 2012. There was interest in developing banks on a couple ranches in Wyoming, and we didn't have any stream crediting or debiting methods. So the Corps brought the IRT together to discuss developing a stream mitigation procedures, and this is really how this whole process got started. So Wyoming, when we started this in 2013, we decided to borrow from our neighbors to the north. So we looked at the Montana stream mitigation procedures. And there were a couple things that we wanted to change in Montana's method, and primarily that the Montana approach considered, dominant impact type for calculating debits. So whether it was a stabilization, channelization project, that type of thing. And they assigned credits based on what activities you were conducting at a mitigation site. And we really wanted to move away from this kind of activity-based approach and modify the method to better incorporate concepts of stream function. And so really what we did is we took a lot of what Montana had put in their stream mitigation procedures, but we replaced their activity-based multipliers with function-based multipliers. And then we recommended that people could use several approaches to evaluate existing condition. The assessment methods that we really felt were common and available at the time in Wyoming included proper functioning condition and NRCS's stream visual assessment protocol. The procedures also recommended looking towards the stream functions pyramid framework for general guidance and also other Department of Environmental Quality data in Wyoming. But largely, we were relying on these qualitative assessment methods to look at categorical changes in function. So a lot of the ideas from version 1 came from this document, the function-based framework for stream assessment and restoration projects, which was released in 2012 developed by EPA Fish and Wildlife Service in collaboration with Will Harmon and Stream Mechanics. The IRT really liked this approach and felt like it represented a good organizational framework and a really good communication tool for thinking about the various functions that are occurring in streams and really thinking about ways that these functions are interrelated. And so for those not familiar, this is the stream functions pyramid that is mentioned in this document. And it's an organizational framework to help think of the various functions that stream provides and how the various functions relate to each other within a stream system. So here's what the original Wyoming stream mitigation procedures looked like. And can you guys see my pointer? I don't know if you can, but essentially on the debit side,
we can see your pointer. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. So we looked at, using these qualitative assessment methods to define kind of what the existing condition was in these three categories: non-functional, deficient, or functional. And then we looked at the type of loss as it related to functions. So, partial functional loss would be, one or more stream functions would be degraded by an impact. Full functional loss would be that most of the functions would be impaired or lost at an impact site. And then similarly on the mitigation side, we looked at, again, incorporating multipliers for net riparian and stream improvement tied to the amount or the magnitude of lift that we anticipated at a site. So, substantial was defined as moving from like a non-functioning category to fully functioning category of condition. Moderate would be moving from like non-functional to deficient, or deficient to functional. So how did this work out for us? So we had, once we developed the stream mitigation procedures in 2013, one of the banks moved forward to develop and finalize their mitigation banking instrument. And as we were working through the MBI process, there was some discomfort on the IRT in relying on these qualitative assessments alone to inform how much lift was happening on the site. These are the methods, these qualitative methods are fairly rapid and subjective, and they lack repeatability from one practitioner to another. And so there was some level of discomfort in really relying on this for the mitigation bank site to receive credit for that lift that they were anticipating. And so what we ended up doing for the mitigation banking instrument was adding quantitative performance standards that would support the assessment conclusions. So we looked to that, the stream functions pyramid framework document for ideas, and we pulled out some quantitative measures and incorporated them in as performance standards within the banking instrument. And then after the bank was approved, collectively, I think the IRT thought, well, there's got to be a better way that we can do this. And so we kept talking about the need for moving to more quantitative approaches to describe stream function. And around the same time, Will Harmon with Stream Mechanics had been working with the Environmental Defense Fund in North Carolina to develop a stream quantification tool, which was really this spreadsheet calculator that was an outgrowth of the stream functions pyramid framework work that he had done. And so the team in Wyoming decided that we wanted one of these too in Wyoming. And so we set to work adapting the stream quantification tool for Wyoming. And essentially, the stream quantification tool is a spreadsheet calculator that consolidates a suite of well-established quantitative metrics into a single condition score. When you take this score and multiply it by a project length, you get something called functional feet. And that's what we use as kind of our unit measure in talking about credits and debits now in Wyoming. And so this gives us a functional basis for debits and credits, a currency that's based on, measurable indicators of condition and function in these systems. So we started this process, I think, back in 2016, and by August of 2017, we had a beta version of Wyoming stream quantification tool. We released that out for public comment and beta testing, and then made some pretty substantial revisions following the public comment and beta testing period. We got a lot of really, really good, meaningful feedback from folks, and were able to make, I think, some very constructive revisions to the version 1, which we released last July for implementation in Wyoming. And so just a quick tour of the stream quantification tool. It's organized very similar to the pyramid itself. So here you have your functional categories. In the Wyoming stream quantification tool, we combined the hydrology and hydraulics just so that we had a more balanced approach to scoring. So we have 4 functional categories. And then within each of the functional categories, we have multiple parameters. And these parameters describe and support the functional statements. And then for each of the parameters, we have metrics. And metrics are the actual measurements that you take in the stream to generate the score. And so these are the various metrics that are included in the Wyoming stream quantification tool. And then lastly, when you enter a field value, it converts it to an index value. And we have reference curves that we used. We derived these from existing data sources that characterize the functional capacity of the system. So basically, it translates all the field values and all the different measurements from these different metrics and approaches and puts them all, it assigns them an index value on a 0 to 1 scale, 0 being, no function is provided, and a 1.0 being, the kind of tip-top reference standard condition. And so this is really data-driven, which is exciting. And so then the way that scoring works in the tool is pretty simple, so that we have the flexibility to add and subtract or adjust the metrics based on specific project goals and objectives. Or, in the future, when we update the tool, we don't have to go back and rework all the scoring based upon how things balance in there. So it's pretty straightforward. Index values for each metric are averaged for a parameter score if there's more than one metric within that parameter. And then the parameter scores are averaged where more than one parameter is filled in. They're averaged to get a category score. And then the category scores are weighted and summed to create an overall reach score. So reach hydrology and hydraulics is 30%, geomorphology is 30%, physical, chemical, and biology are 20% each. If physical, chemical, and biology parameters are not measured, then that limits the overall potential score that you can achieve to 60% of the total. So this, in a way, incentivizes people to monitor physical, chemical, and biological parameters at a mitigation or restoration site, so that they can get credit for achieving lift in those categories as well. And so just to walk through an example, I mentioned that functional feet was calculated by taking the score and then multiplying it by the project size. And so for the purposes of this, we use stream length. And so here, you have a site. This is an example of Wills from up in Alaska. And so the existing condition score at this site came in at a 0.21. And the existing stream length was 1,600 feet. You multiply those together, and you get a functional foot score of 336 functional feet. So the proposed condition was much higher. So the proposed condition score was predicted to be 0.75. Because of the work that they did, they added an additional 40 linear feet of stream, which led to a proposed condition functional foot value of 1,230 functional feet. And so then what we do with that is we look at the difference between the proposed and the existing condition scores, or that delta, that change between the existing and the proposed condition, to calculate the functional change. In this case, it's 894. And that delta, or that change in the functional feet, becomes the basis for talking about debits and credits now in Wyoming. And so just a kind of a general summary of the SQT. So it's really intended to calculate functional loft and lift associated with stream impacts and restoration projects by quantifying changes between existing and future stream condition of the site. So it is intended to look at the difference between an existing and a proposed condition score to inform permitting and mitigation decisions. It can also be used to develop monitoring plans and set performance standards. And then it also has other uses that relate to planning of project sites, setting project-specific function-based goals and objectives. And all of that is also outlined in the user manual for the SQT. So as I mentioned, the SQT itself is a workbook that is used and applied at a specific project site. There are a few things that accompany the SQT. One is the user manual, and that explains how to enter information into the spreadsheet, and it also includes information on how to collect data at a site and calculate the metrics that go into the SQT. We also have the scientific support document, which explains how we derive the index values for each of the metrics in the tool. So I mentioned the reference curves, and so this document really explains how we developed the reference curves, defined the index values, and also it provides other background on how things are weighted in the tool. And then, of course, importantly, you know, the tool needs to have a place where it sits and a document that explains how it's going to be used. And so what we did is once we developed the stream quantification tool itself, the team went back and revised the Wyoming stream mitigation procedures. And so version 2 of the Wyoming stream mitigation procedures rolled out along with the tool in 2018, last summer. And so this is just a look at what the new table in the stream mitigation procedures looks like. So the SMP version 2 still includes a table that looks at adjustment factors for debits and credits. It's been simplified. We took out a lot of the things that we thought were already accounted for in the tool. For example, buffer. You know, we have a riparian width metric, and so you know, the width of the riparian area that is protected and restored is accounted for in the functional foot calculations within the tool. And so that was something that we were able to take out of the adjustment table. You know, I think that the major difference between the version 1 and version 2 of the Wyoming stream mitigation procedures is the base unit. So before you had your linear feet of stream, that was then, you know, you had all these multipliers that applied to that. But really where we went in with version 2 is that the base unit is that change in functional feet. So the base unit is the lift that you calculated at a mitigation site or the loss in functional feet that you calculated at an impact site. And then the adjustment factors apply to that. And so really, you know, the currency is foundationally based on aquatic resource lift or aquatic resource loss at mitigation and impact sites. And so just to give you, to kind of walk through what that actually looks like. So like I said, you start with that change in functional feet, and then you would multiply it by these adjustment factors, and that would give you your debit. And then similarly at a mitigation site, you know, you start with that delta, that change in functional feet at the mitigation site, and then you apply the adjustment factors to that lift calculation, and that gives you your credit value at a mitigation site. And so just if we go back to this example that we kind of walked through before, and we run it through as a mitigation scenario. So let's say this is a proposed bank site. Let's say it's in a conservation watershed. The sponsor is going to apply a conservation easement with an additional buffer area that extends outside of the riparian width. And then they're also proposing that 20% of credits be available as advance credits. Let's figure out what credits they would get at the site. And so, as I mentioned, the kind of the foundational unit is this change in functional feet, and so that's 894 functional feet. And then we would take that and consider the multipliers, the 2, the 5, and the 2%. And so you would get an adjustment factor on that. And then you have your timing adjustments based on the various schedules of credit availability. And so essentially your final credit availability in this example would be 992.1 functional feet. And then that is the amount of credit that you would have at the site. And so that is really all I have to present to you guys today. I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you so much. That was a really great review of the methodology. I do have a few questions that, for you, Julia. The first is, who measures the baseline water quality parameters? Is it the consultant or the state? And if it's the consultant, are they given state-approved water monitoring protocols or QA/QC procedures?
Yeah, so it would be the practitioner that would collect all the baseline data at the site. The user manual for the Wyoming stream mitigation procedures includes Appendix A, includes all the data collection methods. A lot of these were pulled directly from Wyoming DEQ standard operating procedures, which have, QA and QA/QC protocols incorporated.
Great, thanks. Hope that answers that question. And then there's another question about the adjustment factors, and I think it's asking, is there documentation for the adjustment factors? Is that included in the procedures as well?
Yeah, so the stream mitigation procedures document outlines what, defines all of the various adjustment factors and how the percentages would be applied.
Excellent. Okay, so roughly how long would you estimate that it would take to develop and implement this approach in an area that currently does not have it? So how long was the process?
So the process in Wyoming, it took us probably two years, I think, from the start to having an implementation version of the tool. In Colorado, we're currently working on building off of Wyoming's tool. And so from when the Wyoming version 1 came out, we're probably a year behind them. We're about to put out the Colorado version of the tool. I would say, the process that we used to develop the SQT was an interagency driven approach. So we worked really closely with the Corps. We worked really closely with Wyoming Game and Fish and Wyoming DEQ to develop a collaborative effort. The states brought in various resource experts to help us with certain pieces of the tool. And I think that any time that you do a collaborative process like that, it's going to take time and it's going to take investment. And then you also have to consider what the data availability is within your state. And I think, for Wyoming had some good geomorphic data sets that we were able to work off of that were already existing. And so that made things a little bit easier there. But I mean, I would say, 2 years probably is what it would reasonably take to do this if you did it in the collaborative format that we worked on the tool.
Excellent, thank you. Another question is about the time it takes to complete the function measures. So about how much time does it take for an applicant to go through the procedure at a project site, the functional measures?
So it depends on what methods they use. So we do include kind of various levels of effort in our Appendix A. So from a geomorphic standpoint, we have a rapid geomorphic survey that can be done fairly quickly. And then we have, the ability to take data from a longitudinal survey and incorporate it into the tool. And so I think if, they were looking at kind of a basic level of assessment, not evaluating physical, chemical, or biological parameters, but just going out in the field and really collecting kind of your reach hydrology, hydraulic, and geomorphic parameters, it would be less than a day it would take to collect those data.
Excellent. Okay. Just in interest of time, I'm going to move over to Vina, but we do have a few other questions we'll raise at the end. So thank you so much, Julia, for that great presentation. And I'm going to transfer over to Vina.
Hello.
Hello. Okay, great. We see your presentation and we hear you. Thanks.
Wonderful. So I too am going to tell the story of the development of a stream quantification tool, much like Julia just did, but ours took a little bit longer than the 2-year process. Screen is not moving.
Yeah, sometimes it just takes a few seconds.
Okay.
Keep maybe trying your buttons and hopefully it will move.
So, like Julia, we did a very similar process in the state of Tennessee, and it was a broad-based collaboration with many federal and state agency partners as well as the use of national experts like Stream Mechanics and Jennings Environmental. None of this work would have been possible without a heavy lift from all of those individuals that are on the screen, including the Stream Design Review Group, which was a group of practitioners who gave us continued feedback on iterations of the tool and its ability to be implemented and how useful it was. So in Tennessee, we asked ourselves, should we update the guidelines and why, if so? And really, we wanted to improve the explanation of what activities constitute a loss of resource value and when mitigation is required. We wanted to provide a quantitative and scientifically defensible framework for how the amount of mitigation required to ensure no net loss would be evaluated. We wanted to really modernize what type of activities were eligible for offsetting resource value and provide mitigation site selection evaluation guidance, really site selection criteria, so we knew we were selecting the best sites for mitigation, and improve our performance standards and monitoring. But at the end of the day, it's really about how to determine credits and debits. In the state of Tennessee, we have approximately 15 to 25,000 linear feet of impact every year that requires compensatory mitigation. So we have a ton of activities. And we had a primary in lieu fee service provider that operated on offsetting those activities. And we based that on the 2004 stream mitigation guidelines. Those guidelines, though, as time passed, were really highlighted by them being just a descriptive set of guidelines that based crediting on words like pattern, profile, and dimension, and did not require baseline information to be collected. It used subjective methods to determine if the restoration had been adequately met. And we saw over the years we had a lot of crediting drift, meaning some members of the IRT on older projects considered high quality mitigation, and then others maybe not so much, but gave them the same amount of credit. And the debits were based on a similar system, but basically were 1-to-1 for encapsulation or 0.75-to-1 for double bank riprap. We rewrote the stream mitigation guidelines in 2012 and released them to the public, and it didn't go over so well. We did it because we wanted to try and be consistent with the core requirements and align with the 2008 federal mitigation rule. We wanted to establish functional lift and move away from linear footage at ratio-based system, but we didn't do it as a collaborative approach, and we therefore lack the capacity in-house within the state to create a robust functional assessment system. So we had to go back to the drawing board. And when our leadership approached us with this issue, they really said we needed some strategic planning in order to implement a good program that captured everybody's goals and was inclusive of all of our stakeholders. We are a we have customer-focused government, so including our customers in the process was a priority. So we worked on a method to engage our stakeholders before we selected the methodologies that we were going to use. And then we worked with the IRT to evaluate all of the potential assessment methods that were out there. And then we established parallel pathways. While we were developing the tools and gathering data, we were also routinely doing education and outreach to our stakeholders and our internal staff so that everybody knew what was happening and when. It took us about 6 or 8 months through the IRT exploration process to select the stream quantification tool that Julia described as our primary option, as our go-to option for really becoming the tool to help us evaluate credits and debits. The benefits of the SQT was that it was numerical, and it determined the difference between existing and proposed condition. It really helped link restoration activities to function-based parameters. We thought it incentivized high-quality stream mitigation, provided information for the site selection, and helped us develop success criteria, and came with a great way for the monitoring plan and to monitor a project over time. With that tool in mind, we developed a suite of long-term and short-term goals to help us complete the process. I know one of the questions in the audience was, how long did this take? For Tennessee, it's taken us 6 years. We have a robust permittee lobbying group. Our Department of Transportation and other impactors are really robust and active and wanted to be part of the process. We had a lot of political interest in the process. And then we have 2 separate core districts, the Memphis district and the Nashville district. We had to make sure that collaborative partnership was aligned, and then all of the other agencies that were involved. So with that in mind, our long-term goals were really to develop a tool that could work for all, and it was a stream function assessment to capture lift and a companion debit calculator. With that, we knew we needed to update the stream mitigation guidelines, and we wanted to update TDEC rules on mitigation. This would require 2 sets of rule changes, the water quality standards and the aquatic resource alteration permitting rules. Our short-term goals were to streamline the process. So, having approximately 20,000 linear feet of impact occur every year means there was a lot of activity going on, whether it was ILF sites or permittee responsible mitigation. And we thought it was important, while we were developing a larger tool, to also bring consistency to the process by doing some small incremental changes, by bringing banking templates, making banking templates accessible, contributing to and working with the Corps to develop land use protection documents that would work for both agencies across the state. Creating checklists so that practitioners knew what was expected of them and when, and then creating a mitigation crosswalk. And that was really as we started to incorporate the ideas of a functional assessment, but still were under the 2004 mitigation guidelines. We could connect those ideas of those stream functional categories in the pyramid that Julia talked about to ratios that discussed improvements in pattern, profile, and dimension. And every step of the way, communicate. We had, I often say, if you haven't heard TDEC or the Corps give a talk on the stream functional assessment or the stream mitigation guidelines in the past 5 years, you probably haven't been in the state very long. We have had so many joint education outreach events. We've provided trainings, workshops, and webinars because we thought it was important to be very transparent about what we were doing and when we were doing it. So first off was to develop tools. For our stream quantification tool, we knew that we wanted to gather data that we already had and partner with the IRT and other agencies to access and use that data to build our reference standards, and also collect data that we didn't have. And that was going to help us regionalize the SQT to make it unique for Tennessee. In our data gathering and analysis efforts, we spent about 18 months building regional curves, hydraulic geometry relationships, collecting information on unique bed forms across the state, riparian vegetation, and then mining the data that we had for biology and water quality for about the past 20 years. We also collected large woody debris information, and once we had our regional curve sites established, we went back and collected biology and water quality at those sites also, establishing ecological reference sites. So with that, we had over 120 ecological reference sites across the state with multiple levels of data. Some of them were primarily morphological, some of them were primarily biology and water quality, but nearly 60% of those sites have reference data for all 5 stream categories, from hydrology all the way down to biology. It was important for our leadership that they felt we had a robust set of data to build our reference curves on for the stream quantification tool. Once we had the data, we began to build those reference curves that Julia talked about, and it was an iterative and incremental regionalization process. So what that meant was, after we had determined as a team what stream category parameters we were going to use in the SQT, we had a mitigation assessment team, which was an internal working group with the IRT, pour over the data and help develop those curves based on the information that we had. We reviewed and analyzed existing, gathered new, and once those reference standards were established, we would send that information out to the Stream Design Review Group and the members of the IRT. Those groups would review that information and give us feedback, and then we would refine those curves and build into the tool that information. We had several beta versions of the tool that we public noticed. I think we had 2 rounds of comments on the SQT before the final version was released. For streamlining the process and communicating change, we developed a series of workshops that we delivered across the state for all stakeholders that focused on small changes and also introduced the concepts of the big change to keep that open line of communication. We had webinars where Will Harmon actually provided the education. We had workshops where we took practitioners in the field and discussed measurement methods. And we slow walked the process so that everybody felt comfortable. And this is just an example of national experts working with actual practitioners to discuss with them and go over the tools that we were actually implementing. And we brought everybody out in the field, and we continue to do that to this day. We also have manuals, much like Wyoming does, but we have broken ours into 4 separate manuals. The user manual for the TNSQT talks about how to use the Excel workbook. The user manual is for the functional lift and functional loss. You will see on our document title that it is for the Debit tool also. The Rapid Data Collection Methods Manual is for the rapid version of how to collect the data. It is what stream practitioners use at the draft prospectus or prospectus stage. and it's what impactors use if they're measuring their existing condition to calculate their debits. The detailed data collection and analysis manual really is that longitudinal look at the stream, and we expect that information to be collected at the mitigation banking instrument stage. Or if you're doing a large-scale permittee responsible stream relocation of several thousand linear feet, we would expect you to collect the information in a detailed fashion also. And we will have a science support and rationale document coming out soon. I know that there was a question in the audience about the time commitment for collecting the data. The rapid methods, we say, takes approximately 2 hours. The water quality and biology component of that can be collected by the state. If the practitioner would like to collect that data, the manual describes how you need to use the TDEC QSSOP for macroinvertebrate data collection, and make sure that you're a qualified biologist able to conduct that assessment. The detailed method, that's about an 8-hour process. Our Tennessee stream quantification tool looks very much like Wyoming's. For our workbooks, we have multiple tabs where with the project assessment, a watershed assessment page, your parameter selection guide, which tells you based on your site if you should be using parameters for large woody debris or bed form diversity. The quantification tool itself is the actual calculator, and then we have additional tabs that allow monitoring data and a data summary of your site over time, followed by the final tab, which is reference standards. Our scoring is just like Danny and Julia's. It's on a 0 to 1 scale, and it's broken into easily recognizable color categories of red, yellow, and green for not functioning, functioning at risk, and functioning. This is important to remember when we discuss the Debit tool in a few. So when we had the SQT finished, it then became apparent that we needed to develop a companion tool to the SQT, but that expecting applicants to go out and use the stream quantification tool to project the functional loss at their site may be more challenging than we wanted to make it. So we did a very similar process based on the same logic model as the SQT, but kind of in reverse. The Debit tool is a spreadsheet calculator, just like the stream quantification tool, and written guidance. It has two additional components, though. It has something called an existing condition score, which you have for the SQT, but what you don't have, but what we have here is an ability to either complete all of the metrics, or option 2, which is probably going to be the most popular option for applicants, will be estimating your field assessment scores, which means you gather data for some metrics but not others. And then if you're not capable of collecting all of the data based on skill or time, you can take the standard existing condition score, and we tier that for a 1.0 for exceptional Tennessee waters or outstanding national resource waters. A general stream would have an existing condition score of 0.8, and an ephemeral channel of standard condition would have an existing condition score of 0.32. You couple the existing condition score with the impact severity tier, and that is tiers of impacts based on type and description and projected functional loss. to get the debits that you would be owed. The existing condition score requires field assessments for options 1 and options 2. The first option is the full existing condition score, just like you would do for the stream quantification tool, and it would take about 2 hours to complete for all the stream category parameters. Option 2, like I mentioned before, is assessing some parameters while not assessing others. And then the last component of the existing condition score is a minimum score. The leadership here at TDEC, along with our Office of General Counsel, felt that it was important to establish a minimum mitigation requirement to ensure that we have no net loss of resource value. Because all streams and wetlands serve important functions, the determination of existing conditions shall ensure at least a minimum protection for all streams and wetlands, notwithstanding prior degradation. Therefore, when the stream mitigation guidelines are published, it establishes a minimum existing condition score for all streams to ensure mitigation is sufficient to maintain classified uses and water quality. So the existing condition field score of the Debit tool is very similar to that of the stream quantification tool. The difference is our index values for the Debit tool are already pre-populated. This gives us an overall existing condition score standard of 0.8. Once you change a field value based on measured data, your index value will change, and so will your existing condition scores. If you're in an ephemeral channel, which the state of Tennessee doesn't regulate, but our federal partners at the Corps do for now, you can modify the amount of measurement methods you're required to assess by selecting a flow type of ephemeral channel. Then most of the parameters like bed form diversity, physical, chemical, and biology, along with floodplain connectivity, will be eliminated from the calculation, and your overall existing condition score will be a 0.32. The impact.
Vina, I just wanted to give you maybe a 5-minute or so time check.
Okay. The impact severity tiers were developed through a combination of modeling of activities to determine functional loss, and then some regression equations to develop impact factors based on those activities. And I'll just briefly buzz through these. We have tiers ranging from 0 to 6 that represent minimal to no loss. And as you climb in number for impact severity tier, so does the amount of loss that you will see occur for the resource. I didn't list impact severity tier 6 because that's basically stream fill. We tested the Debit tool with a whole bunch of the Department of Transportation projects to see how it worked. And we saw that under the 2004 mitigation guidelines, an example here, a project needed 2,500 debits. Using our model that helps better capture functional loss at an existing condition score of a high quality stream, the debits went down significantly. Once we did an estimated existing condition score, that option 2, and measured some parameters but not others, we saw an even bigger drop. Reviewing more projects, we saw that we could capture, based on existing conditions, significant amounts of difference between the 2004 and the and the new guidelines, which the Department of Transportation appreciated. And then we used the same process to look at compensatory mitigation projects to see if they had an equitable amount of sensitivity to determine if they were, if we could evaluate whether or not they were seeing enough lift. The red box indicates projects that we, as the IRT, would have given a 1.51 to 1 ratio, full restoration. And you can see that evaluation of the SQTs determined that not all of the projects were rated equally. In fact, we had some that proposed really high lift, while others a minimum of 0.21 low. So this system will really help us move away from the categorical-based mitigation ratios and ensure that crediting is better linked to functional lift by the mitigation project. We also had to update the mitigation guidelines, aquatic resource rules, and the water quality standards. And we feel like we hit a home run with the guidelines, plotting out everything that we wanted to change. Two big things that we changed in the rules. The rules now say that resource value compensation, it has to go through a quantitative assessment or other scientifically defensible method. And at a minimum, all new and relocated channels, including mitigation watercourses, must maintain or improve classified uses and flow. So we've really accomplished most of our long-term goals and our short-term goals, except for finishing the stream mitigation guidelines, which are due to release in the next couple of weeks. And we hope that the mitigation rules will be or the aquatic resource alteration rules will be approved by August. This has improved our market and coverage for mitigation banks across the state. We have over 38 banks pending now, so this represents historic and new, and we feel that that's a real testament to the validity of the process. And this is just an overview of the 6 years it took us. The SQT, of course, is complete. The mitigation guidelines have done the public notice. They'll be released very soon. And the rules will be approved by the legislature sometime in late summer. Finally, our strategic planning for the future. It's really important for the state of Tennessee that we build a process for version control of the quantification tool, since there's multiple agencies using it for compensatory mitigation. Also for updates to the tool that we hope to happen every 2 to 3 years, and a process for parameter and measurement method substitutions based on a specific project. This will require an MOU with the Army Corps and, of course, more training. Any questions?
Excellent. Thank you so much, Vina. That was really interesting. And it was interesting to see the two similar systems side by side. So that was really, I have a few questions for you, and I'm also going to unmute Danny and Julia if there are more questions coming in. The first question, I think maybe you touched on it, is this system being used for 303D, or is that still using state assessments?
I'm sorry, 303, what?
D.
I don't think
you don't think it is?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So we do have water quality assessments that go beyond the quantification tool. That is actually how we assess streams for the 303D list. We may be incorporating some of the components of geomorphology into it, but the water quality and biology components are what we do now for 303D under the Clean Water Act.
Okay, great, thank you. And then a clarification, and I hope I'm reading this right. The question is, so applicants can estimate, I guess, components in the methodology, but sponsors have to go through the full effort. That's the full question. I'm not sure if you can pick apart the difference there. Maybe that's different between
Correct.
debit and credit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, yes, that is correct. Applicants do not have to measure anything. We actually promote using the standard existing condition score of 0.8. But if they think that their system is not functioning on that level, they can measure some parameters and take the default score for the ones they don't measure, or measure all parameters just like a compensatory mitigation provider would. However, the difference is debitors, impactors, are held to a minimum existing condition score of 0.4. Their streams cannot be scored lower than that for debits. But a stream compensatory mitigation service provider, of course, could do the full suite of metrics and say that the stream they plan to do functional lift on does score lower than that, therefore gleaning them all of the credit based on that delta functional lift, even if it scores below a 0.4.
Great, thank you for that clarification. I think that's helpful. Okay, another question. Can you explain a little bit further why ephemeral channels are assumed to have 32% function, where that comes from?
Yeah, so that actually comes from reviewing what parameters of the current stream quantification tool would be applicable in an ephemeral system. We also looked at the CORS or ERDIC's HGM protocol for high gradient streams and matched the parameters that they have in their assessment method with ours to say, yeah, these are applicable to an ephemeral high gradient system. Fluvial processes and like bed form diversity don't crop up in, steep slope streams. So the limitation, because it's an averaging tool, the limitation of those parameters mean the maximum amount of lift you could get in an ephemeral channel is 0.4. And then if you had a standard existing condition of 0.8 in all parameters, that would equal an overall existing condition score of 0.32.
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification. I hope that's helpful. I'm going to unmute Danny and Julia. I did have one clarification question for you, Danny, that I wanted to get out there. One of the participants said the SWIM spreadsheets don't appear to be available on the Huntington website. Is there another place you would point them to for Ohio?
Just go ahead and have them contact me, and I will get them to them.
Okay.
And if you don't have them, I'll go ahead and say my email address.
Go ahead.
Danny.
Okay.
Danny, DANNY .Bennett, BENNETT @wv.gov.
Okay.
If you just send me an email, I'll send you both the HGMs and the regular spreadsheets. Be more than happy to do that. I found it interesting that all three do use Delta. We use the difference between the existing and the final condition as the base for our model. So
yeah,
we're all about on the same page.
Yeah. Well, we just have a couple minutes left, but I wanted to ask just a final wrap up, and I think all three of you touched on it a bit, but how you think the methodologies are working now, what kind of feedback are you getting? What do you anticipate, in the short term for acceptance of the methodologies and things like that? So if you just want to briefly touch on that, maybe start with Danny.
We've had a fairly positive response. Like I said, our regulated public does appreciate the fact that they're not being mitigated at the just using a ratio base, so that if you're impacting a severely impacted stream, you don't have the same mitigation obligation as someone that may be impacting a high quality stream. We are coming up to some major revisions and modifications. We do have a huge modification to the wetland part of the SWIM, and then we'll take that opportunity to fix some bugs on the stream end. But overall, we've had very positive response. When our Department of Transportation, who is our biggest impactor has gave their blessing, I consider that a positive.
Excellent. Julia?
So I think, you know, in the West, we have much less developed mitigation markets than there are out East. And so I think it might take us a bit longer to really have a good body of implementation examples that we can pull from. But I think, you know, Vina touched on it, over and over in her presentation, which is communication and training. And I think that that's something that we've seen is that, you know, the more that we're out there articulating what this tool is and what it does and how it works, you know, the better it goes. And I think that the more that we do that, the better it's going to be.
Yeah, thank you. That's really important. Thank you for bringing that up. And Vina?
So we have slow walked the transition over the past, you know, few years. We're getting ready to implement the stream mitigation guidelines that changes the currency in an already pretty robust market from ratios to functional feet. There's a lot of nervousness about it, but there is also a lot of acceptance because we have done such a significant amount of communication and training.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much for those final comments, and thank you again to the panel. It was a really, really interesting panel today, and we really appreciate your time and your expertise today. So thank you. Thank you to the participants for joining us today. We appreciate it and happy to have you. Again, our next webinar is on May 2nd, Restoration for Multiple Purposes. It's going to be a really interesting webinar, and you'll see the invitation for that one come out next week, I think. So look for that, and feel free to email me anytime if you have questions or want any additional information, or if you have ideas for our final webinar and a wrap up. If there are things that we haven't covered that you would like to see covered, or ideas, or you see challenges or gaps in the current implementation of stream compensatory mitigation, and you'd like us to try to cover that in a final wrap-up webinar, or at least kind of pose those questions, please let me know. You can do that in the questionnaire that comes up at the end of the webinar, or email me anytime. We appreciate it. So thank you again for joining us. Thanks again to our panel. It was an excellent webinar today, and we hope to see you in 3 weeks for our next webinar. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.
Goodbye.